Good evening and welcome to the first Audit Committee meeting of 2023. May I wish everyone here and those watching at home a Happy New Year. I will now take the first item on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
We have apologies from Councillor Edwards and Councillor Teacher.
Thank you, Steve. And can I thank Hazel and Gloria for substituting today for those councillors. Thank you for coming along and sparing your time. Take item 2 on the agenda, which is a record of the meeting. Can I sign the record of the meeting held on the 3rd of November 2022 as correct? Agreed. Thank you. I'll take item 3 on the agenda, which is urgent matters. And I understand there are no urgent matters this evening. Item 4 on the agenda are declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests and other significant interests. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Golding.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of OSIs for item 5 and item 6, the audit report and the Treasury Management reports. There's reference in both reports to the Medway Development Company, of which I'm a director, and I also chair its subsidiary company, MDC Land and Projects Limited, but I do have a dispensation from the Council of Conduct Committee to speak on and vote on such issues. Item 7, the contract procedure rules. I chair Medway Council's procurement board, and I did have an input in reviewing the contract rules, but just to make that clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goldwyn. Anyone else? No. Now take item 5 on the agenda, which is the first report, which is the interim audit findings report 2021 and notification of appointment of auditor from 2023 to 2024. I will ask our applicant and Darren from Grant Thornton to introduce this report. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I'll introduce if that's okay. Yeah, as laid out, this report provides an update on the ongoing audit by Grant Thornton, and has their interim audit findings report attached at Appendix 1. Also confirms the auditor appointment from 23-24. Just to say that obviously things have been delayed, and and the report lays out some of the reasons for those delays in the audit, which we're obviously hoping to conclude very shortly. And I know Grant Thornton are looking to bring a final report to the March Audit Committee meeting. So Darren, I know, will be happy to talk through any major items of the report and answer any questions that members may have. And obviously, yes, Grant Thornton have been appointed as our external auditor for 5 years from 2023-24 right through to 2027-28. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I'll open it up. Members. Tristan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to everybody. Happy New Year to everyone as well. So I have a couple of questions. I may take them in 2 tranches to allow other people to speak as well. So my first question is around the delay in a particular valuation company that has caused problems in this report's sort of timeliness. I know you've given a justification for that, and I suspect, again, not your fault. It's quite clear this company hasn't undertaken their responsibility. Can I ask what redress we've engaged with this company? Because the material impact of this one company not engaging with our auditors has been quite significant in terms of delays. I mean, I note on page 3 of the auditor report 17 of the council report, an entire paragraph there. And it seems, and they've mentioned something called a pattern of engagement, which suggests that it might have been more systemic or something that has been seen previously, or might have been the case that other audit other audits for other councils with this valuer have had particular challenges. So I was just wondering, have we identified, I mean, obviously we have to be careful on disclosure, but are we aware of who this valuer is? And is it possible that in future we might choose to use an alternative valuer? Is that something we could look at? So that's my first question. So my second question, I'm sorry, I've got a slight echo that is linking. In relation to page 22, so page 8 of your internal documentation, you've raised an issue around ISA 240, and in particular third parties, and you've indicated that you wouldn't have nature of the revenue streams of the council and its subsidiaries, we have determined that the risk of fraud arising from revenue recognition could be rebutted. Now, I'm surprised at that judgment, primarily because, I'm not going back in history, but only in relatively recent history have we had a third party at this council, which is currently subject to an ongoing police investigation on those very terms of fraud. Now, I'm not going to preempt that investigation's outcome, but I'm just interested to know why you come to that judgment when you know that there is currently, or has been in recent history, a history in this authority of third parties that perhaps have not acted appropriately. So I just wanted to know why you've come to that judgment. And then on page 25 or page 11 of your report, the second section down, accounting for grant revenues and expenditure correctly, I just want to know, because whilst the conclusion of that is interesting, you've noted that the council has incorrectly accounted for the Better Care Grant Fund. This will lead to an audit adjustment in the grants note of some 14.6 million. Now, that is a significant sum of money, and given our projected deficit and Q3 was around 50 million, I think approximately, 14.6 is a significant sum. Could I have some commentary as to how that has occurred, please? Because that obviously has had a material impact, I suspect, somewhere along the line. So those are my first three questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take the one on the valuations. Yes, currently we are looking to our valuations for 22-23, and I'm working with other officers to look at outsourcing those, and obviously we will take all things into consideration when we appoint an external valuer.
Thank you, Chair. If I take the next two. So on page 8, the fraudulent recognition of income. So this risk, we have to consider this risk both for the council's own single entity accounts and the group accounts. It's not uncommon for the fraud recognition to be rebutted for the single council authority accounts, which is what we've done, and I think that's what we've done in the past. It's the first year of group accounts. We were aware of the issue that you referred to for previous years, but we also considered the scale of the income that's being reported through the group accounts, and it was that steered us away from treating it as a significant risk, but nevertheless we're still undertaking work that would look at the income stream to ensure that the group account income recognition is complete and accurate. But it's just a slightly lower graded risk in this instance. And then to your second question on page 11. So I think this is a disclosure change on the note itself. It's not, we're not actually suggesting that there's 14 million of income that's not being correctly accounted for through the income and expenditure statement. I think it's the way it's been captured through the grants or through the Better Care Fund disclosure note.
Councillor Golding.
Yes, just to make a comment on the property valuations. The council's property valuation team is a very small team, so it has been necessary to outsource it, as well as having a very small team. Unfortunately, that team has been plagued by a number of officers having quite severe health problems, which hasn't helped. Unfortunately, the local company that was engaged to do the work have proved perhaps not to be as good as we thought they were going to be. So yeah, we will have to look at that. But we do have a interim sort of head of valuation service who's just been appointed by the authority in the last couple of weeks, and I'm quite sure that that person will be addressing these issues and making sure that we catch up and be where we want to be, because certainly the last thing we want to do is delay the process of getting the accounts through the system, and which your audit is a very, very important part of. So, yeah, I'll make sure that that is brought to the gentleman's attention. Thank you.
Councillor Brown? Hazel?
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Actually, Trish has asked the one about the valuers, which was one of my main questions. But the other questions I have actually are for Grant Thornton, and it's about these additional charges that are appearing here for non-audit work as well as audit work. So I'm just kind of confused as to why they weren't in the original fees, and how different is Medway from some other authorities, because I saw one of the fees was about 10 grand for a complex audit, and I don't know how we're any more complex than any other council. Actually, maybe we are, but you could maybe explain that one to me, please.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So I think you're referring to page 35, Appendix E, and this sets out the makeup of the audit fee. It's not the final audit fee yet, and we reported to this committee March this year and set out the audit plan and the rationale for the makeup of the audit fee. The £10,000 that's highlighted against the complexity of audit, that really seeks to reflect some of the issues that we had in the audit of the 1920 accounts, and which were therefore reported to this committee at that point. And that audit unearthed quite a large number of adjustments that were needed. And I said at the time to this committee, I felt that the scale of those adjustments was slightly at the higher end compared to other authorities. And inevitably, whenever errors and issues are raised, there's a dialogue with the financial management team to work through the issues. Often it involves more work on their part to unearth the nature of those issues, and therefore more work on our part when we reconsider the additional evidence that's provided by management. So that was the estimation, really, to reflect the nature of the issues that we faced last year, and which have the potential to continue into this year's audit.
Tristan.
Is it my second round? Okay, so a question I have on section, first of all, on B. So this is the delivery section. I'm just going to try to get the page number. So it's from page number 25 onwards, so to about 33. So these are follow-up of prior year recommendations. So these are audit issue and risks that were previously communicated to us as an authority, and an update on actions taken to address the issue. So that is what members are looking at now. There is a significant number of these which have either not been actioned at all, there's no update at all, or are called to be determined, which suggests to maybe a casual observer that either someone hasn't gone back to someone with an email of what has actually happened, or we have a bit of a poor record of actually following up on prior year recommendations on behalf of the audit, external audit, which is somewhat concerning given an external auditor has certain authority and certain sort of prominence. So I just wanted to have some communication as to why it is about 90% of our follow-up prior year recommendations are TBD, or to be decided. I don't know if that's an internal issue that needs to be communicated, or whether or not it's an external one, and whether that's commonplace for authorities to be in that position. as a benchmark. So that's my first question. My second question is just around, is simply, with all the delays due to the valuation situation highlighted in a prior question, how is this going to impact in terms of the completion date? So is there a completion date or a draft completion date that you have at present? How far delayed has that been because of the situation that has lent you in? So, and is anything else going to be delayed since? You've indicated that you've had to bring in additional resource because this has been quite a complicated process beyond that which you would normally consider. Obviously I can't forecast going forward, but usually if they've had to bring in additional resource, that might mean that in future years we might get additional cost allocated to the account. Obviously I don't want to put you in that position where you have to comment on that, but if we don't improve the situation with the valuer, is that something that might happen as a result? Because you've had to utilise additional capacity internally to have to redress the ongoing concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So on Appendix B, this is really the update column is our response to whether we think through the follow-up, the issue that we reported last year has been addressed. So there are a number still to be determined because our work in those areas are still ongoing. Where we have followed up and been able to comment, then we do, and we indicate on the left-hand column of the assessment as to whether we think the recommendation has been appropriately actioned or not. So yes, whilst there are a number still for us to evaluate and determine, it's largely just where we are at this point in time and because the audit has been delayed at this point of time that we report to you. And I don't think it's anything more untoward than that at present. I think your second question was, what does that mean for completing this year's work and future year's work? So we've discussed and agreed with the finance team, and our target is to complete the field work by the end of this month. That is dependent on engagement, prompt responses to audit queries with the valuer still. That's still a significant proportion of work that's in progress. It's still in the engagement of the finance team, and I'm conscious, or we're conscious, that supporting the audit by responding to audit queries is only one aspect of their workload. So that's a factor. But both sides are working to the end of January. That's not to sign off, because I know we will need to come back to this committee in March and report the outcome of all of that work. So the earliest that we will be able to sign off the 2021 audit is March of this year. I think then the council has still to prepare its 21-22 financial statements, and we will look to begin the audit of the 21-22. I think the substantive field work will be quite later in the year. I think we've got some elements of planning that need to be undertaken earlier in the year, but we'll probably end up starting the field work October, November of this year. Discussions we've had with your finance team is both sides are conscious that we need to get back onto the regular cycle, because it's more difficult when you're out of kilt. That won't be this year, but I think we ought to have a target between us that by the end of 24 we have caught up and we're back into the regular cycle. And then to your final point about the audit fee, I'm always rather hesitant to say specifically that there will be additional fees. We tend to look at the position holistically and determine if and when and why we've had to incur additional time and cost, and if we have, how much of that is outside of our control. And then we have a fairly open and frank conversation with your finance leads, and then the outcome of that conversation is reported here. So I would hope to be in a position to report that to this committee in March. And then it also goes through a process with the Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited Company, and they determine whether any fee variance that we consider as appropriate and that which we've discussed is reasonable to charge the authority for. There does clearly remain the potential for a fee increase given where we are and given our original planned completion of the audit and where we are currently today.
Follow up on that, and I appreciate you can't answer that question in its entirety. However, this looks like it is the valuer that has caused this problem. This one particular organisation that is potentially has led us into this position where there's a possibility of an increase in fees. That does need to be there needs to be some redress internally about that organisation and how they've acted, because that is a cost to the public taxpayer potentially. If that were to happen, and we shouldn't be acceptable. Organisations should be engaging with our auditors in a professional capacity, and it's pretty clear that they, certainly from this report, I get the intent that they probably haven't been forthcoming with information as quickly as possible. So I don't know if that's something we can. I don't think we have recommendation powers, but I don't know if that's something we can look at, Mr. Chairman.
Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, you're absolutely right. They have let us down on this occasion. As Andy said earlier, we are looking at alternatives going forward in terms of that work required in terms of the valuations. But I'll take on board the point that you've made, and I'll go away and investigate exactly what it was we asked them to do, what the terms of that contract were, and to what extent they've been in breach of that.
Okay, so, oh, sorry, Hazel. Go on.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. This is just me being, I think, well, I'm not misunderstanding. I normally can read these reports pretty well, but I'd just like somebody to try and explain to me the minimum revenue provision section on page 27. What does that actually mean in plain English? Does it mean it would have been 3.37 million and now it is going to be 19.96 million over the next 5 years, or over the 5 years outlined in the report? Because I'm not understanding I just don't understand the words, because there's figures in here that confuse me. Like there's 1K and the council intends to charge the accounts 1K for the following 5 years. I think it's a technical thing and I just don't understand it. Sorry, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. You may recall that a couple of years ago we commissioned Link, our Treasury advisors, to have a look at how we'd been calculating our minimum revenue provision over a number of years. And they went back to the start of when the prudential system was introduced, which was fortunately before I joined the council. So that's my excuse and I'm going to stick to it. But they came to the conclusion that we'd been over-prudent in the way that we'd calculated. There's a technical adjustment A, which was when the whole system was introduced, carrying on from the previous regime for how these things were done. And they came to the conclusion that we'd got something, I think it was about 18 million at the time. Sorry, I can't see the figures. That we had over-provided. Now, we weren't able to just say, oh, right, that's 18 million, we can stick into, move from one reserve to another. What they recommended was that we actually took a sort of payment holiday. Now, we cannot provide MRP as zero, so we have to put in a token amount.
Okay.
So we have been whittling that down, and it's all virtually gone. I think it's the end of this year that it runs out. The benefit thereof, but it was just a sort of, if you like, one-off adjustment.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Okay, members, thank you. Right, so I will take the recommendations at 8.1 and 8.2 of the report on page 13. 8.1, the committee is asked to note the issues raised and judgments by the auditor as presented at Appendix 1 to the report. And 8.2, the committee is asked to note the appointment of Grant Thornton LLP as the external auditor for the financial years 23-24 to 27-28. Is that agreed, members?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. And can I just thank Darren and Applicant for their time this evening. Thank you very much indeed. Members will take item 6 on the agenda, which is the Treasury Management Strategy for 23-24, and I'll ask Jonathan Lloyd to introduce this report. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this is, as usual, the annual management strategy, this time covering the years 23-24 and beyond. As always, the aim of the strategy is to try and keep borrowing as low as possible, and as a consequence of that, it also means that cash balances will be relatively low, which will limit the scope for long-term investments. That's investments of cash rather than capital expenditure in pursuit of council objectives. One thing in the report that's I'm seeking approval for an increase in the limit for fixed rate lending to our subsidiaries from 100 million to 125 million. And this reflects increased requirements from our subsidiaries, principally Medway Development Company. And this is referred to in paragraph 3.2 of the covering report. And also in that same paragraph, I'm asking for an increase in the limit for variable rate borrowing, excluding the LOBOs, from 100 million to 150 million. The reason for this is that we are expecting significant capital receipts in the next few years, and this would favour us taking out short-term rather than longer-term borrowing. And incidentally, loans that are due within 12 months are classified as variable rate, even though they may be at a fixed rate, but for obviously a short period of time. So technically they are variable rate. In future, prudential and treasury indicators are going to be reported to you on a quarterly basis. And the council continues, as always, to operate within the capital financing requirement, but this just proves that we're not borrowing for revenue purposes. On this ilk, SIPFA have introduced a liability benchmark, which is the pretty graph at section 4.2. I wasn't looking forward to having to explain this one, but this graphically illustrates that we're operating within the CFR, based purely on the existing capital programme. And it shows that both loans and the CFR will decrease over time. So looking at the graph itself, the heavy black line at the top of the graph is the CFR. The orange line, which is below the red dotted line, and apologise for those of you that are, any of you that are reading the printed black and white version, the orange line below the red dotted line is the net loan requirement. That's our forecast level of debt net of treasury investments. So having taken off the treasury investments, we've got principally the property fund, the property funds, because it implies that we could actually sell those investments if we wanted to. The red dotted line is the liability benchmark, or gross loan requirement, which is the net loan requirement. I hope you're all following this. Plus a liquidity allowance, so plus a little bit for ready cash, as it were. The other heavy black line, the one bordering the shaded areas towards the bottom, there are actual loan balances, and the shaded areas below it detail the breakdown of those loans, the light pink being the other local authorities, the greys being the LOBOs, the salmon colour being the debt to the reorganisation debt to Kent County Council, and the blue line being the PWLB debt. Now the gap between that heavy black line, the actual borrowing, and the red dotted line, the liability benchmark, shows that new loans will need to be taken in those years. Right, having got through that, the maturity profile is shown at 4.3.5, with peaks in the next couple of years, reflecting the desire not to get locked into very high rates for a long period of time when significant receipts are expected. The usual prudential and treasury indicators are shown at Appendix 3. And the nearest we get to an affordability measure, because I know this is something dear to members' heart, is the ratio of financing costs to net revenue stream. But just because these ratios appear to be modest does not mean that we have the money. That's part of the wider consideration of the council budget as a whole. I mean, as a local author might have said, annual income £400 million, annual expenditure £399 million, result happiness, annual income £400 million, annual expenditure £401 million, result misery. The operation boundary and authorised limits are technical limits, and they're to our borrowing, and they're shown at 4.6 onwards. I'll just point out that included in the appendices is the MRP policy at Appendix 1, and also at Appendix 6 there's a list of the changes to the Treasury management practices since the 2022-23 version. The fully updated TMPs are then included at the end of the agenda item. And I think that's all I've got to say initially, so I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, John. I'll open up to the chair. No, open up to the floor, sorry.
Yeah, so three questions. First of all, one of my regular ones on Lobos. I don't know if you've had just an update, really. Have there been any communications from our lenders on change of terms? Because obviously that gives us the potential to potentially extract ourselves from those in favourable conditions, perhaps. And seek a PWLB alternative, which is something which I think we're all quite keen on. Second of all, just on the on 3.2, just so that I'm clear, so you're expecting a significant increase in capital requirement, as in spend on capital over the next couple of years, and therefore you need to have a larger borrowing capacity to cater for those revenue, for that spend, I understand. A large number of capital spends we're doing are government funded, so I'm assuming it's linked potentially to HIF and all sorts of other government funded expenditure. My issue with that is that whilst I absolutely agree, some of those government grants are timed, so it's effectively once we complete a designated project, the money comes through the door. So I understand the principle of going for longer term borrowing because it is cheaper from an interest rate perspective than perhaps maybe short term borrowing. But I don't. What sort of time period were you looking for here in terms of I mean, you mentioned over 1 year would be considered long term. Have you looked at products? What sort of time frames are we looking at? I suppose the reason why I raise this concern is because, especially right now, where we have sort of the time that there could be an impetus to start spending on capital projects which actually have very little return. And my concern is, at the moment, is that there are one or two of those on my radar, which are projects which are very expensive, which actually have very limited capital, very limited return at all, and which are not as financed. I'm not going to name those particular projects, but my issue is why? Can you just clarify why it is we need to have more long-term borrowing if the government for HIF bids and others are giving us that money? Because then why not just a short-term loan as we have done previously? And I appreciate page 8, the liability benchmark. So it's absolutely clear that we do need to borrow in the next significant period of time. If this is correct, all the way up to, you're going up to 40, 20, 30, 40 years, we're going to have a significant. So you're forecasting the future, or is this something which you can, is there a variability in terms of some of these lines? Because you've given me fixed lines here, but I don't know if you can predict where we're going to be in 2070, for instance. I mean, there's going to be all sorts of variability creeping in on this. So I absolutely understand why you're looking at longer term borrowing. I understand that. But my concern is that that's going to be used for short term purposes, and I'm not comfortable with that per se, especially given our current financial situation and concerns about the future provision of local government settlements. I'm seeing councils around the country that are running out of money and are declaring they're declaring bankruptcy, and yet we're now inescapable. We're having to go through long-term borrowing. I don't know how that perception will be with the public. So I just need much more narrative around why we need to increase our borrowing limits and what exactly that 50 million addition is going to be spent on, okay, or where it's going. Because some of the capital schemes that we're doing at the moment are not, in my view, sensible. And my worry is that they're going to be funded on borrowing in the next 2 or 3 months, when actually that's just not a sustainable footprint. So is there some clarity? I mean, I don't want to get into the politics of it, but just the sustainability of it.
Thank you, Councillor. First of all, I'll take the easiest one first, which is your first question about Lobos and have we had any further correspondence on that. And with the exception of that one exploratory phone call that I told you about last time we met, there's been no further communication whatsoever. I would point out that the Lobo loans are at more or less PWLB rates now, so there's no great incentive one way or the other really. It would be nice to be able to be in charge and smooth out the maturity profile a bit instead of having that peak in about 2068 or whenever it is. In terms of going on to the borrowing, and what I'm actually asking for is that we've got, obviously we cannot borrow more than our CFR or our authorised limit, and they're within the indicators. Within those limits, we had set ourselves a limit of £100 million for short-term borrowing. So, of all the loans we've got, no more than 50% or £100 million should be short-term. I'm saying I actually want to do more short-term and not the next tranche of loans be taking out for 50 years or what have you, precisely for the reasons that you say. Well, actually, this is what the liability benchmarking is about. It's showing that you're not borrowing for longer than you need to. You're not going to get in a position where you've put money aside through your MRP, that the amount you've got stashed aside to repay loans exceed that you've borrowed more than you're due to pay back. Sorry. Yeah, that's what it's about. So in fact it's actually saying no, we want to do more short term, because in the past you've expressed members have expressed concern that we've got rather a lot coming in the next couple of years and then it drops off. Well, this is the reason that we want to do it, is that we are expecting to get some of the receipts in from MDC and the likes, and we don't really need to have those loans outstanding for longer than that. In terms of borrowing... Sorry.
So there's almost a bit of a technicality, as Jonathan said. Anything over 12 months is deemed long term, but give it a year's time, and a 2-year loan suddenly becomes a short term loan.
Yeah.
So, and that's what we're talking about. The big chunk of our capital programme at the moment is MDC, and this is taking significant borrowing for a fairly short period, couple of years during construction phase, and then the capital receipts come in to repay it. So that's the kind of debt profile that we're looking at. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I can just follow up, just very quickly, apologies, Mr. Chairman. And I understand now the rationale, and I appreciate you clarifying that for me. So the next question is presumably you've looked at the rates, because there could be short-term changes in interest rates over the next 12 months, and we could see interest rates going up again and again and again, and certainly the forecasts are that might happen. Are you taking into account the fact that there is potentially big scope for an increase in interest rates, in which case you'll be paying more back on short-term loans than perhaps a longer-term loan at this moment in time?
Actually, the current thinking on interest rates, and are that we may be due another increase or so, but then they're going to level off and start reducing ever so slightly. They're not going to reduce to the sort of levels that we saw a year or two ago. but we think they're roughly at their peak, but we could be wrong. One of the things that I'm always conscious of is there's often quite a considerable amount of slippage in the capital programme. I'm usually quite embarrassed that I come to this committee and say, next year we're going to borrow £200 million. And then I come to the outturn report for that year and we've borrowed, 50 million or something. Because things haven't, because perhaps we've been over-optimistic in our profiling or what have you. So I don't do a lot of borrowing based on, we think in a year's time we're going to do that, and I don't try and second guess whether the rates are going to be higher. We do consult our Treasury advisors on that, and if they thought it was really going to be that significant, they would no doubt be advising us to borrow. But one of the things that the liability benchmarking is designed to prevent you doing is borrowing in advance of need.
Hazel.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jonathan, for the report. And I see that our link group have advised on what their best guesstimate around interest rates. And I do accept that we are looking at relatively short periods of loans to a third party. Now, at another committee, I did ask about the repayments of these loans, and I was assured that we were getting monies back in. And if we're getting monies back in, but we're borrowing money to give back out on the other hand, the cost is falling to the council here. And also actually to MDC, because obviously they're paying us some interest, hopefully, on the monies that we're getting back in. I just wondered where I see those in the report. Are they don't come because we haven't had the monies yet? Is that accurate?
Well, in terms of MDC haven't actually paid us anything back yet, but they have taken into account the receipts that they have had in reducing, the next tranche of borrowing that they need. In terms of our external borrowing, I only borrow when we are short of cash. So any money that we've had in, I'll look at, do we need cash or do we not need cash? We've got X amount in capital to pay out, and it was an automatic process, if you like, based on our cash flow that I'll be borrowing against. We have had repayments from Kindy, but that's a different kettle of fish, so a different ball game.
Yeah. No, my concern really is that if we're going to keep borrowing at big figures, like 150 million, and even if you don't go on the same day for all of it, that we are indebted to that amount, speculatively, really. And I'm not suggesting that MDC are badly run or anything like that, but if they get into a problem, we're the people holding the baby. And I'm really concerned about that, and I do accept that colleagues are too, but I'm caught between listening to the logic for agreeing to more moved into your short-term borrowing, or us allowing that as our ceiling, and actually the whole thing, because I'm really not convinced. I mean, I was told we got the money back, and now I'm told we haven't got the money back, but we don't have to lend them so much. Is that what I'm being told?
Thank you, Chair. Can I come in there? So obviously, when we set up the development company, and the approach that we've taken, which is that the company takes loans from the council, we have to borrow that funding to develop the housing, and then we benefit from the capital receipts. Obviously, there was a risk associated with that, which the administration deemed an acceptable risk. We went through the business case process of setting the development company up. Now, to offer you some reassurance, the first of the developments that the company has taken forward, Garrison Point, the sales are doing really well, aren't they, at the moment? So we're confident we've got an asset there because it's essentially built, and I think it's something like 75% of the units have actually been sold. So on that particular investment, we've achieved, or MDC has achieved what it set out to do, and we will get our money back in terms of repayment of the loans that MDC took. Now we're in the middle of Chatham Waterfront. That's the next one in the pipeline, and we're obviously current economic circumstances have changed that risk profile a little bit, but the company has been set up in such a way that it's got options to mitigate that risk. So now we're looking at things like private rented as an option rather than sales, and that will change the financing profile, and we'll restructure the debt around that. But yeah, no, I mean, you're right to raise it as a risk, but it was a risk that we went into as a council with eyes open.
I accept that. We went in with a business case based on one reality, and the reality has seriously changed, and I accept that, Phil. But if you sell 75% of your asset, you have money. So I would have presumed that we would have revisited the risk with MDC and looked at reinvesting that money rather than borrowing more money to finance the next phase. If the decisions that are made are different than that, that's just a different way of managing the risk. But the risk, when we entered into it, was in a very different landscape. And I'm just putting that on record.
Gloria.
Thank you. Just very quickly, let's see, following up from Councillor Brown's questions, 75% is huge, obviously. When are we likely to start seeing the figures there for the reporting of the figures, especially if it is to do with them paying us back part of the loan, please?
When they expect to see the cash coming in from those disposals?
And I'm not expecting an exact period. We could say, well, in the next 6 months, 1 year or something, so that at least us as council, we wouldn't know to expect that report, please.
Adrian.
Well, I'm in a position to give an indication of where we are. Yes, it's correct. We are 75% sold off plan. Most commercial developers would consider 50% sold off plan to be extremely good. So to be 75% off plan sales is quite exceptional. I will qualify that by, because we have had a good help with that by Homes England giving us First Homes grants, which has made our product, MDC's product, extremely good in the current market. So we did hope to have our first residents in the building by now, but unfortunately, due to the shortage of labour, the programme allowed for 20 people to be doing dry lining. At one stage we were down to 12. That's made a significant detrimental effect on the progress of the project, and unfortunately the weather didn't help in the last few weeks when you're trying to point brickwork in the pouring rain, even under scaffolding. You're not going to do a good job, so that had to be stopped. The first residents will be moving in at the beginning of next month. We've already taken the deposits from them. As Phil had indicated, by taking the deposits, that has allowed us to offset the drawdowns that are made quite significantly, so the borrowing is less on that. Once those contracts are finally dealt with, we will be getting the money from the banks and the building societies prior to the first occupants moving in, so that will start in quite a significant way next month. I can also say that we've had the first 2 sales on Chatham Waterfront, which is quite significant already. We're also looking at Mountbatten House, which is still in the council's ownership, but for the project to progress, then MDC will have to purchase it and then fund the building works there. So that's a bit, and we are seriously looking at the PRS, the private rental sector. the benefit of that is, as well as giving a broader market approach by having different products, the income from that is in a different way. The income will come in over the whole lifetime of the project, because we were effectively renting those properties out. So the council were having a cash flow over many, many years. And as members well know, that is one of the things that's been a problem, as central government has cut its grant to local government. Every year we've had to look round for cost savings. Well, I'm not saying that's going to close that gap by much, but it is going to make a good contribution. So those are the projects in the pipeline. And the other benefit from this, we've also got to remember, is not just financial for the authority. It is in the regeneration of Chatham. And already we are seeing significant private sector interest in regenerating and developing in Chatham. I don't think that would have taken place had not Medway Council taken the initiative and led the way in that. So, yes, the finance is important, of course they are, but we've also got to look at the other benefits, and the regeneration of Chatham is paramount in that. That is, to me, is probably the most significant benefit of all.
Close there. Okay, members, thank you. So we'll take the recommendations at 6.1 of the report on page 53, and that is the committee is asked to consider this report, note its contents, and pass any comments on for consideration by the Cabinet, and recommendations to full council for approval. Are we all agreed on that, members?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We will now take item 7 on the agenda, which is the contract procedure rules, and I'll ask Mike Kelly to introduce this report. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah, good evening all, and thank you for having me this evening. So today I bring in front of you a revised suite of the contract procedure rules that's set as Chapter 4, Part 7 of the Council's Constitution. Whilst the main consideration given in the overarching report would be relating to the level at which internal governance kicks place, I think the report kind of brings in a much more holistic and more pragmatic approach to the way in which we procure, a much more user-friendly approach to make interactivity a lot more straightforward, and it will really help develop other strategies, such as the procurement strategy that we have, which dovetails into this as well. So I'm happy to take any questions on that front.
Thank you, Mike. I'll open up to the floor. Tristan.
Thank you very much. Just a question. This is an issue which has come about within children's services. So where a couple of years ago, contracts were or agreements were made between people around services. I think you might. I'm not going to go into the detail of particularly what contract or with whom, but it has been highlighted since. There's been some work done by the Ford team under James. That some of our governance around some of those arrangements perhaps wasn't particularly strong. In fact, the documentation around the contract had been mislaid or had disappeared due to email systems. There was nothing individually complicit, but email systems had disappeared. Can I, just in terms of your category management capacity, does this overarching, are we looking at how some of these sort of agreements in the past have been conducted, and what structures have you introduced with this that's going to stop that type of thing happening in the future, so that we're not coming back and saying, can you show me the contracts that we can't find from 4 years ago? So is there I ask this in a really simplistic way, because I'm not a specialist in this area, but is there going to be like a central database where people have to upload contracts and that have to get triple signed by someone in finance and someone independent or third party to that, so that we can't have one service effectively sending money out the door without someone knowing about it, and then us getting caught exposed, shall we suggest, a few years later, and liable, because obviously if we're not paying for a contract we don't know we have, then that potentially is a liability to us. So just wanted some narrative around where we're going forward in regards to that.
Absolutely, and thank you. Yeah, so when these contract procedure rules were redrafted, they were reverse engineered to understand, they've been in place for 10 years now. How has the team performed? How has procurement operated as an authority? How do we commission services, etc.? we've got several directorates, as you'll be aware of, for example, and there's pros and cons that are riddled throughout, and that's usually linked to what are they purchasing and how and what sort of pressures relate to that as well, although inexcusable in most instances. Okay. One of the key introductions to the revised suite presented today is about what's called a category management engagement form. Now, whilst it sounds simplistic in its nature, what it allows us to do is bring involve the portfolio holder, the relevant accountants, so on and so forth, at a much earlier point of the process to ensure that we've got cross-organisation collaboration when we talk about these procurement activities, and we take away and we break down the historic issues with silo working, for example, which, you know, whilst we both won't name the project, may have been an issue that stems from there as well. To build upon that, the revised suite also facilitates a much more streamlined allowance to training. And I talk about a three-tiered training program, for example. So we talk about those who actually commission activities, those who will run through it. We then talk about a management layer of training. So for those who manage officers who are responsible for it, and the third and final one is actually about member engagement and member training, for example, that sit behind it as well. So when we look at commissioned activity, it's wrong to assume that everybody knows what we should be doing, for example. So to empower members and officers and managers, for example, with the relevant tools that they need to be able to look at these commissioned activities and ask the pertinent questions to ensure that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet.
Thank you very much. I think you have clarified. Obviously, with children's services, there has to be some fluidity because some of these things are decided at very quick notice. Some of the notice. So, and as long as there is within the new structures, there's structure and accountability, but also some understanding around some of the time management issues that they might have. That's the case. Just as a secondary aside, obviously you're dealing with the logistics of contract and procurement. One of the things which we have challenged or has been challenged in the public domain is, so for instance, around a valuation on a project which might be conducted. So I'll go back again. Well, let's look at a historical one, say 15 years ago. The Rochester Airport, which funded an airfield that said they were going to cost £4 million. We paid for someone to come and tell us that. RAL Limited, I think, at the time, which was, I think, an organisation that was somehow connected with the airport themselves. So, whereas independent valuations came out as something different, but we never saw those until a Freedom of Information request had been done. So, my question is do you push? Will this structure push back around the certification of who you're contract, you know, so for instance, if there's a public interest in that organisation gaining the money, they shouldn't be the one providing us with their they shouldn't be one effectively giving us the value of the project overall. There should be some third-party oversight. And in terms of larger projects, also, are you going to recommend getting more than one valuation? Again, in the past, we have relied on multi-million-pound projects on single valuations, and again, we have highlighted how that does bring concerns because projects might be valued differently by different or two or three organisations might come up with different valuations. So again, is that being recommended that on big projects we get more than one valuation on capital spend?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we need to hedge against the valuation of an initial capital project is how much can we afford in the offset. So, for example, how much do we need to expend to create the business case that sits behind it, for example? So what I can confirm is we have various mechanisms, we have various frameworks that sit back office that allows us to do almost offline valuation, shall we say. So we've got organisations that we've worked with repetitively that are compliant with what we're talking about historically and here as well, which give us a level of confidence. I think there's several projects, and you know we've got economic factors that may unhinge that model slightly sometimes. Whilst again, I guess we won't go into the projects. I think we need to look at the intelligence that creates those valuations and ensure that they're robust, so that we've got a level of confidence. You know what I can say in this phase is that we are seeing quite a lot of our projects coming in over budget at this point in time. So whilst we're not just looking at the procurement activity itself, we're trying to look at how we value engineer those projects to ensure that they're still viable and that we're still meeting the deliverables that we collectively set out to achieve as well. Does that answer it?
It does, and actually, I'm just looking at the mechanism that you would use to hold to account, not the actual decision, because the decision is taken elsewhere. So the question I had is, if there was a big capital project, would you be able to say, wait a minute, I need 2 or 3, this contract tendering process needs to include, it must include over a certain value, an open tendering process with 2 or 3 valuations coming through, which I understood was the legal requirement on big projects. So
Sorry, I misheard valuation for evaluation. Sorry, so I missed the E at the front. So what we've asked, and this comes kind of back to the question, it's kind of implied in the contract procedure rules if you live and breathe them. So sorry, I'll give that some context. So when we go out to the market, anything over £25,000 goes in the public domain. And what we do is we do level of market engagement. We try to round the market up slightly just to get a level of interest. We conduct a small army, actually, of market engagement events. So that works quite well coming back to the children adult scenario where we get people in the room, we talk to them about the opportunity, how they can be part of it, for example. But to come back to the capital projects, anything over £25,000 goes in the public domain. We know the normal people who will bid for this as well, so we can actually hit them up independently as well. So we do generate, and when we look at benchmark information across other local authorities, we generate an awful lot of interest in our procurement activity as well. You know, I appreciate not everybody looks at the procurement strategy here as well, but I think there's a level of consistency that the market likes to buy into. So I think we are building upon that. And the common theme earlier was that cross-organisation thing. So a couple of common themes in here is being able to challenge the other services as well. It's about empowering that two-way dialogue to make sure that we aren't just going with what's being asked of us, but we're challenging those decisions and vice versa as well to ensure it's the correct one.
apologies, Mr. Chairman, I know you're being patient with me. And the reason I raise this is because there are a number of capital projects that are potentially going to happen this year, some of which are contentious or not, or some of which have raised contention, shall we say. And the question is we are provided as members with X cost. We're told this is the organisation, this is the cost it's taking, whereas you potentially have actually probably got 3 or 4 companies which have bid for the process and have provided a cost. And yet, as members, potentially we might not have seen that. We only get the overarching cost with one organisation. So, and that's a wider governance issue. If we are spending multi-million pounds, it would be helpful for members to potentially have all of the different procurement people who are interested, what they're saying it's going to cost. Because actually, sometimes the lowest cost isn't always the most accurate. And I cite the one from 15 years ago. This is an historic issue, but that tarmacking was never going to come out of that, because looking at the private sector costings that similarly come through, it was twice that. So, and that's the thing I don't really, because there's a reputational risk of agreeing to something and then not delivering it, because the cost potentially, you've gone with the cheapest option, but the cheapest option might not always be the deliverable one. So I'm interested to know, and I appreciate your, and that's something which we'll take off offline, but I appreciate that with big projects over 25,000, it will go out to a tender and anyone can then submit their interest. Okay, that's interesting, and I, as a member, I would like to potentially, with some of the big capital projects, is maybe see some of the valuations across all the different bids, and that's useful for us to know. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Well, it's quite obvious, Tristan. It's a very positive step going forward. So I think we should enhance this. Adrian.
Just like to comment on the tendering process. All that information is made available to the procurement board. It's assessed by officers. We don't score just on price. In fact, the majority of the contracts that we issue, quality is the determining factor rather than price. So then that is, the price is scored against the quality score that the prospective supplier has been allocated by a team of professionals, which includes the service that is going to be on the directorate that's in, as well as advice from the category management team. The amounts that people tender is considered to be commercially sensitive. I think we would get ourselves into a lot of trouble if we put that into the public domain. It is on blue paper when it goes to the procurement board. So we, you know, I make very care because when I chair the procurement board, I prefer working off paper copies, and I always make sure that those parts of the agenda are properly disposed of. Yes, there is quite a strong evaluation process that goes through. But remember that not everything goes through the procurement board. I mean, there is an issue that I've been having for some considerable time, is our tail end spend, which is all those, you know, the small stuff, but that small stuff adds up to a great sum. So we do have an issue with IT that was being procured by the various directorates, and various software that was purchased to do certain jobs, which seemed very good at the time, but then we find it's not compatible with the rest of our system. So we're working our way through these, and I've got to say Mike and his category management team have been exceptionally helpful with that. Yeah, since we've gone to the category management methodology, not only has it saved a considerable amount of money for the authority, but it has also meant that we have qualified people, hence the term category management, dealing with it, and also it's enabled us to have our wider determinants, like getting social value, for instance, which is very, very important. Yeah, so it's not just a matter of getting a good quality service, value for money, but also ensuring that we get social value, for instance. And one of the things that we've been trying as an authority to do is to encourage small and medium-sized enterprises to bid for our business. And I think we've been quite successful in that. And I was pleased to see that, according to a report that came out recently, Medway's 18th out of 250-something local authorities in putting business to small and medium enterprises. About 51%, I think, isn't it, Mike?
I'm going to ask
Yes.
Mike to come
Yeah.
in here, Rachel.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, and just to address one other point that you raised earlier, which was quite right as well. So to give you some level of assurance in terms of, we can't change what's happened, which is quite obvious at this stage. What we are working on is what's called a forward plan. So we do have a central contracts repository where everything is stored. We're working with the various services to make sure that's accurate and reflective, and we'll come into the new way of working as well. So I think that's a step in the right direction, which isn't implied in there, but I just want to pull it. The other thing as well, and Councillor Galvin just touched upon it as well, and something that I'm keen to report to members in some way, shape or form, which is about social value. So we talk about cost, but we don't talk about the benefit to the local economy as well. The revised contract procedure rules make specific reference to social value and how we can enhance the local community via procurement activity as well. So something we're working with the various directorates is what's important to your area, you know, portfolio order included, that we can embed and we can show direct results as part of our procurement activity. So we're not just talking about getting a cheap acquisition anymore. We're talking about how can we enhance and how can we broaden social benefits through our procurement activity, and that's what this really pushes towards.
Hazel.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Michael. I think you might have partly answered the question I'm about to ask. I'd just like to know, as somebody who's bought millions of pounds worth of stuff, some of it for Medway Council, over the years, there's lots of good practice stuff in there. There's lots of the ordinary stuff in there. What specifically in this is different from what we did before, in very simple terms? I got all the answers about new systems, repositories, cross department working. Well, I interviewed for the, well, some people around this table will know how long ago we've been trying to get rid of silo working in this organisation. And some of us might have made an attempt at it years ago. The social value stuff, which is in all the good procurement guides, whether across the public sector, we'll take that as a given. But what is in this that's different from what we did before? Just simply. And
it's bringing teams together ultimately, and that's the common theme. We're talking about we're not just talking to colleagues in children's, we're talking about where there's cross-organisation activity with housing, for example, and other teams. We're bringing that together and we're making sure that we're looking at holistic opportunities as an organisation as opposed to 3 or 4 of very similar requirements that we may have had before.
Hopefully that'll give us economies of scale and some call-offs and things, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, members. So we'll take recommendations at 10.1 of the report, and it is the committee is asked to review and provide any comments on the contract procedure rules as set out in Appendix 2 of the report and recommend their approval to full council after consideration by Business Support Overview Committee and Cabinet. Are we agreed on that, members? Agreed. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike. Members, we'll take the next item on the agenda, which is the internal audit update from the 1st of September to the 30th of November 2022. And I'll ask James to introduce the report. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the report at Appendix 1 is the second update on progress for 2022-23, detailing the work of the team from the 1st of September to the 30th of November 2022. I'll just run through a few brief highlights. Section 4 on page 219 of your pack shows how our resources have been used over the period and also details the impact that we've had on resources. Full details of the final review from last year that has now been finalised since our last report to the committee and progress against this year's plans can be found in the tables at section 5 starting on page 220. The tables on page 226 detail the other assurance and consultancy activity that has been undertaken by internal audit as well. An update against the team's key performance indicators for this reporting period is provided at section 6 of the report, which starts on page 228. We've made reasonable progress against the agreed plan, with 31% delivered and a further 17% underway as of the 30th of November. It should be noted that these outturns are based upon the number of reviews we expected to undertake with the projected resource available at the start of the year. As of today, I can tell you that performance measure IA9A, which relates to the proportion of agreed assurance assignments delivered, is now 47%, and 9B, which relates to assurance assignments underway, is currently 5%, but that will change very soon. Section 7 on page 229 contains a request for amendment to the plans to remove two of them. The audits in question are no longer suitable to go ahead, and obviously will help to account for our lost resource as well. That's something I was hoping to avoid happening this year, but unfortunately with a 6-month gap in trying to recruit an internal auditor, it's been quite difficult. Finally, section 8 of the report provides an update in relation to all agreed actions in the table commencing on page 230, and the second table starting on page 235 details actions outstanding more than 6 months after their agreed implementation date. Members will note that updates have been provided by the services detailing progress with those actions. I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
I will open up to the floor. Tristan?
I'm not going to repeat some of the questions I've done previously because I suspect you get bored of answering the same thing. But maybe just around the recruitment position, because I know in previous years I know your team has been moved into other functions because of COVID, and there has been some outstanding recruitment issues. I know you've mentioned there's a difficulty, no doubt, location-wise. Our proximity to London makes it quite tricky, I suspect. I was just wondering, in terms of looking, because obviously only proportion at this stage has been undertaken. Are we expecting a report perhaps over the next, where you're reducing next year's workflow as a result of issues with recruitment? Are we expecting, because I know you were training up a number of the team members, so I was just looking to see if we can have just an update on where we are with the training number, the numbers that have been trained up, and also if we are going to be expecting a smaller workflow going forward.
The answer is there going to be a smaller amount next year? The answer to that will be no, I hope. Obviously, the number of reviews we undertake is based on the projected resource we're going to have available. So I sit at it is like trying to predict the future. I've got to have a crystal ball. So when projecting our resource, it's the number of working days, less annual leave, estimates. We include allowances for potential sickness and things like that as well, training. That then leaves us a net balance of how many work days people are going to be available, the officers will be available. From there, we then say, right, well, we're going to spend that amount of time on assurance reviews. This is an allowance for consultancy work. It's all a very big puzzle to try and piece together. And obviously, I've got to do that, split that resource across 2 councils as well. So in terms of the amount of work, the answer is no, there might be a slight variation on what we originally said at the start of this year, which is based upon who we've got training. We've just appointed someone, but knowing there are national struggles recruiting qualified internal auditors, the market is very much in the favour of the employee. You know, there's a lot of jobs out there, so people have got the freedom to move wherever's best for them. And you're right, proximity to London does have an impact. The changes since COVID means more home working. People can get paid a lot more by a London firm than they could by a local council. So we're not alone in the county in these struggles. We took the decision to appoint an apprentice because we knew we were going to go through lots of struggles to recruit someone who we would then be, so we'd be paying them a full-time salary and sending them on the same apprenticeship that we would be if we employed someone straight out of school. So we took that decision, and having seen what it's done in the fraud team, we took on 2 guys, relatively young, new, keen, and it's done wonders for us. So we kind of said, right, let's take a different tack. We'll try this with internal audit. Unfortunately, I think because of timing, it took 3 attempts to recruit. Some of that was around, obviously, the target audience was students finishing their A-levels. And at the times we went out on the first 2, they're kind of in between doing their exams and getting their results. People not sure where they want to go. Am I going to get the results to go to uni? Do I want to go into work? So we did eventually make an appointment, and she started towards the end of November. And again, someone who's fresh, keen, she's cracking on with things, and it's great. Obviously, she's going to have to go on the apprenticeship and is due to start in April. She's on the next cohort. So we've got those challenges. Yes, we're still trying to some of the people that have been in the team for years just don't have the professional qualification. They've got a lot of experience, but not professional qualifications to go with it, and that's why we've got those performance measures in our report. With that comes the financial constraints. The qualifications cost a lot of money for the courses. If we do it via the apprenticeships, it comes from the apprenticeship levy, so we can spread that cost, but then the apprenticeships take longer to do. And then we've got to give them time for off-the-job learning, which reduces the resource available for the assurance review. So it's a balancing act. We can't send too many people on apprenticeships at the same time because it impacts on our ability to do the work. So it's all very much a balancing act at the moment, but we are really trying to push it forward. Unfortunately, I mean, it doesn't relate to internal audit, but I am losing one of my fraud officers next month because, again, when you're being offered a lot more elsewhere, what do you do? So, yeah, but I don't anticipate there being any less work. But I always say that, as long as no one leaves, again, I'm hoping that we'll have a higher volume of work. So.
Just one from me here, if I may, James. I'm just a little bit concerned on the proposal for removing the assessment reviews for fostering. I know it's going to reduce the amount of days lost, but I'm just concerned about from a children and young person point of view.
Sorry, Chair, what I probably haven't made clear in there is the reason we are not undertaking the review is because they are about to be subjected to an external review. So we would effectively be duplicating, and because we've had that loss of resource, we target what resource we do have to the most appropriate places, and there isn't much point in us duplicating. So for the time being, we will rely on the external inspection that I think is part of the ongoing Ofsted reviews. And then obviously if we feel there's a need to at a later date, we can reconsider it.
Thank you. Okay, members? Hazel.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, this isn't a question. This is a thank you from me as a member, and also from people who have looked at our record on how well you've been doing with your internal audit, and particularly in the fraud management and the audits around that. It's really heartening to find people saying positive things around the effort that's made and the professionalism of which officers are showing in this area. So I'd just like to put on record my thank you on that one.
Thank you. I'll feed that back to the team.
Thank you. Please do that, James. Tristan.
It's actually linked in some way to category management. One of the areas that the LGA have focused on in recent years is collusion with suppliers. So this idea that an individual has a dual interest. So they might have, through services, they might have been linked to an organisational company through favours or grace and favour, and that they then drafted contracts or agreements. Is one of the, have you worked closely with the category management just around any conflicts of interest and how we report conflicts of interest? Because according to the LJ, this is one of the growing areas of concern, where internal individuals might have relationships with external contractors through favours or whatever, and that they're then giving or awarding contracts. And I just wondered, is that something which is on your radar, or some piece of work perhaps going forward, that we are, where there are agreements through category management and procurement, that individuals declare those interests and that individuals are not aligned to agreements where money's going out the door in the public interest?
It's quite interesting actually, because I was talking when just before the meeting, I was talking to Mike, because we do have a review underway for procurement compliance. So obviously part of that we would look at what's included in there. In terms of declarations of interest, it's interesting, no pun intended, but that has come up on a number of occasions in other reviews. So what we look at, what I'm considering for next year as part of an ethical review is declarations of interest as a whole, because it's all well and good managers, or particularly senior officers, they'll have a declaration of interest, but where does that go? Who knows about it? So is it then checked when a particular company is enlisted to do work? And it's come up at other Kent authorities, as I'm sure you've seen in the media. So that is something we are going to look at, trying to look at across the organisation, not just about procurement, but just about declarations of interest as a whole. What are we doing with them? Does someone fill one in and then it sits in a darkened room and no one knows about it? That is a risk. So it is something that's on the radar, yes.
Okay, thank you, members. So I'll take the recommendations of 8.1 and 8.2 of the report on page 214, and that is the committee is asked to note the outputs and performance against the internal audit plan for Medway for the period 1st of September to the 30th of November 2022, as detailed at Appendix 1, and the committee is asked to approve the revisions to the agreed internal audit plan for Quarter 3 and Quarter 4. Are we agreed on that, members? Agreed. Thank you very much. I'll take item 9 on the agenda, which is the counter fraud update from the 1st of September to the 30th of November. Over to you again, James.
Thank you. This is an update report for counter fraud, covering the same period as the last report. And I'll jump straight in. Section 3, commencing on page 242 of your pack, shows how resources have been used over the period, detailing the level of time spent in each of the key areas outlined in the plan. Members will recall this is the first year where we've had a separate and dedicated counter-fraud plan. The tables in section 4, commencing on page 244, provide an overview of the work undertaken in each of those areas in the plan. The tables in page 245 show the summary of results from external investigations and their associated savings. And there's a brief summary of other counter-fraud activity on in the table on page 246, which now includes details of any housing benefit, overpayments or excess council tax reduction awards arising as a result of investigations undertaken by the DWP. An update against the team's key performance indicators for this reporting period is provided at section 5 of the report, which is on page 247. What you'll see is that approximately 219 investigations were concluded in the reporting period, with associated cashable savings of 328,199. As noted in the covering report, this now means that there have been savings of approximately 574,243 for the year to 30th of November, which is in comparison to Medway's share of the counter-fraud costs of the shared service, which are roughly 141,994 for the whole year. So we're well ahead of the costs for counter-fraud and indeed the internal audit and counter-fraud service as a whole. So I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
I'll open it up, but I just want to say how pleased I am with this report, James. It's excellent, and congratulations to your team on this.
Yeah, really good work.
Okay, members, any questions? No? Okay, I'll take the recommendation 8.1 of the report on page 240, which is the committee is asked to note the output and performance for the counter-fraud team for Medway for the period of the 1st of September to the 30th of November 2022, as detailed on Appendix 1. Are we all agreed on that, members? Thank you. I'll take item 10 on the agenda, which is the Internal Audit Charter. And again, it's the James Larkin show. I'll pass it over to you, James.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be extremely brief on this one. As you'll see in the covering report, we've undertaken the annual review. There are no substantive changes to the document, with the exception of adding an updated structure chart to reflect that we now have an apprentice in, as part of the structure. So I'm happy to take any questions members may have about the document.
Members, you okay with that?
Just a quick one, Chair. With regards to the apprentice, how long is apprenticeship?
The apprenticeship itself lasts 2 years, and as I say, although she started in November, towards the end of November, the next cohort for the company that run the apprenticeship doesn't start till April, so she'll be with us just over 2 years. What we've done is the vacancy that was left behind by the officer that left the team last year, we've left it open, the hope being that based on how things have started, she's very, very good. So assuming she passes the apprenticeship, if we still have a post vacant, what I don't want is a continuous churn of we train up some good people and then we lose them. So we've left that post vacant and in our establishment in the hope that if she does do well, she passes her apprenticeship, she would still have to apply like anybody else, but there is a potential job there for her to move into on a full-time basis.
That's good. So what level is her apprenticeship?
The apprenticeship that she's undertaking is a level 4. There are 2 internal audit apprenticeships. One is a level 4 and one is a level 7. The level 7 is obviously aimed at graduates, which again we weren't sure we would be able to recruit to because other local authorities, especially in the county, we're struggling to compete with the salaries. Whereas the level 4, taking someone straight from college, that's someone who's decided university is not for me, but this can lead on to a good career. So that was the approach we decided to take.
It's a win-win situation, isn't it?
Hopefully.
Excellent.
James, just following that, if I may, Chair, so I presume after the 2-year apprenticeship, then there will be the further qualifications to go forward. Do we have the funding in place for that? Because I know for the apprentices, we've made as an authority, we've made exceptionally good use of our apprenticeship levy funding. And I think all officers will be congratulated on that because this is the way to grow our staff. But can we still continue to use the apprenticeship levy for those further qualifications as well?
Potentially, yes. As I say, there are several qualifications, several levels of qualification for internal auditors. The basic one is what we call the CIA qualification, so they become a certified internal auditor. The next step on from that is a qualification in internal audit leadership, which is obviously what you'd be looking for in if you were moving into a management role. The level 4 apprenticeship is designed to get onto the CIA course. You can pay just to do that course. To get onto it, you have to have you've got to have a minimum requirement of A levels. And to be able to then use the designation, you've got to have 5 years experience in internal audit as well, even if you pass the course. The level 4 apprenticeship gives someone a certificate in internal audit. So what that does is it with the apprenticeship itself, it gives them a gateway to doing that CIA course. So if they don't have the A-levels or the degree, etc., that they need to get onto it, it gives them a starting point. The Level 7 apprenticeship is a 3-year course. In year 1, you would do the Certified Internal Audit qualification. In year 2, you do your qualification in Internal Audit Leadership. And in year 3, there's a master's degree. Now, if she completes the 2-year apprenticeship, she's got the certificate that gives her the bypass onto the CIA course if we want to pay for that separately. Or she could potentially start the Level 7 if she so chose, and we could accommodate it and go right the way through to the master's degree. Obviously, we've got the Medpay review going on at the moment, and competency frameworks for individual roles that go with that. So we're trying to factor in where those qualifications sit and what people might be able to do as part of that as well. So I'm hopeful that moving forward, we'll have a proper competency framework in place. The training that's then undertaken is obviously dependent on the council's financial position and what we can do, but if we've got things there, we may well get some career progression really rolling forward.
Thanks, James. It's good to hear.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, and it's lovely to have, if you like, homegrown, as it were. I think it's excellent. Well done, James, and well done to your team. Okay, members, I'll ask recommendations of 7.1 of the report on page 250. And that is the committee is asked to approve the charter as set out in Appendix 1 on the report. Are we all agreed on that? Agreed. Thank you, members. And we'll now take item 11 on the agenda, which is the Internal Audit and Counter-Fraud Strategy 2020 to 24 Review in Progress 2022-23. Thank you. Over to you, James.
And now that you've done the tongue twister, the document Appendix 1 outlines our progress against the agreed strategic objectives during 2022-23. Members will note there has been relatively good progress in almost all areas, with the exception of expansion with other partners. Given our resourcing position, that just simply hasn't been a realistic thing that we can pursue. Hopefully in the future that may be possible, but at the moment we've had to put the brakes on that, but I'm happy to take any questions members may have about what's in the document.
Members? No? Okay, fine, thank you. Okay, we'll take the recommendation at 7.1 of the report on page 262, and that is the committee is asked to note the progress made against objectives set out in the progress update against the internal audit and counter-fraud strategy of 2020 to 2024. Are we all agreed on that, members? Agreed. Lovely, thank you, members, and the meeting is now closed. Thank you for all your time.